How far can someone go before becoming unforgivable? Have you ever done something you knew was wrong and still kept going? Have you ever taken advantage of someone, lied to protect yourself, hurt someone out of pride? Have you ever wished harm, plotted in silence, carried hatred in your heart, crossed a line you swore you would never cross, and after that, thought, God cannot forgive me for this? Maybe you have never sacrificed someone on a pagan altar, but you may have been sacrificing people on the altar of ego, power, or revenge. Maybe you destroyed relationships so you wouldn't lose control. At times, you may have silenced your conscience so deeply that it barely speaks anymore. This is how evil grows, not all at once, but decision after decision. Manasseh was king of Judah, son of King Hezekiah, a man who feared God. But Manasseh chose the opposite path of his father and began practicing idolatry, witchcraft, and injustice toward his people. He sacrificed his own children, shed innocent blood, and led the people away from God. He was considered one of the most wicked kings in biblical history. Manasseh did not just make wrong decisions, he built a kingdom upon them. Conscious choices, repeated, sustained by pride, pain, and a thirst for control. And perhaps that is why this story stirs us so deeply. It is not always about wanting to do evil. Sometimes it is about trying to numb the pain, escape guilt, prove that you still have power over something. But if God can forgive someone like him, what does that mean for you today? With your story, your mistakes, and what you still carry in silence. The most shocking part of this story is not how evil Manasseh was. It is what happens next. When you begin to give in little by little, you didn't walk away from God all at once. And deep down, you know that. It happened slowly, almost imperceptibly. A small adjustment here, another one there, until what once troubled you no longer felt so heavy. The story of King Manasseh begins exactly like this. Someone raised in an environment of faith, but weary, comparing his life to others and longing to take control of everything. This is how many people reach spiritual rock bottom, not through rebellion, but through exhaustion. Perhaps you also made small concessions that seemed harmless. You postponed prayer, relativized values, began to think, this isn't that serious. Before you realize it, spiritual guilt and shame are already there, even if no one sees them. The story of Manasseh reveals something painful and real. No one abandons God suddenly. First you adapt, then you normalize, and then you lose your center. And it is at this point that the question arises, have I gone too far? Is there forgiveness? When power becomes emotional escape, at some point you realize you are no longer failing by accident, but by defense. In the story of King Manasseh, power becomes armor to silence the conscience. Commanding quiets the inner voice. Deciding for everyone avoids facing who you have become. This is where spiritual guilt and shame begin to weigh heavily, and the fear of looking in the mirror grows. It is not about wanting to sin. It is about fleeing from pain that was never named. Perhaps you recognize this pattern. You fill your schedule, take on everything, control details. Because stopping hurts, some people do not fall because they want to sin. They fall to avoid feeling pain. And when guilt paralyzes faith, the heart closes itself off from beginning again with God after sin. One practical step here is simple and difficult. At the same time, remain silent for 10 minutes each day. Write down what you avoid feeling. Return to a short psalm spoken quietly. This gesture creates space for God's mercy to touch what control cannot reach. Your soul wounded by pain and the shame of sin. Guilt that becomes identity. There comes a point when you don't just distance yourself from God. You distance yourself from yourself. In the story of King Manasseh, this is the darkest moment. After hardening his heart for so long, he plunges into total separation, without altar, without prayer, without reference. Guilt stops being a warning and becomes a label. You begin to believe you didn't just make a mistake. You are the mistake. Spiritual guilt and shame start defining who you believe you are, and the bottom of the spiritual pit seems to have no way out. Perhaps you know this feeling of self-abandonment all too well. You stop asking for help, avoid speaking to God, and convince yourself that you no longer deserve anything. But here is the truth that needs to be spoken clearly. Your mistake does not destroy you. What destroys you is believing that you are the mistake. This is the place where many begin to ask, can God still forgive me? God's mercy reveals that even when you fall silent, He does not give up. And what if you are not too far gone? Just too exhausted, tired of trying to get it right, tired of carrying guilt, tired of pretending to be strong when everything inside is begging for rest. This question does not come to comfort. It comes to confront. Because sometimes you did not walk away in rebellion, but in spiritual exhaustion. And that changes everything, even if you cannot see it yet. The bottom of the pit. At some point, everything collapses. In the story of King Manasseh, this happens when he is taken captive, imprisoned without a throne, without influence, without control. This is spiritual rock bottom in its rawest form. Solitude, absolute silence, no applause left to hide the pain. There, you can no longer negotiate with God or with your own conscience. And it is precisely in this place that the question changes tone. Is there still a way back? Stops being theory and becomes a cry. Perhaps you are also at this point, where no strength or argument remains. And here is the revelation few dare to say out loud. Sometimes God does not lift you out of the pit because it is there that you finally stop running from yourself. It was in that silence that Manasseh prayed from the bottom of the pit, not as a king, but as a broken man. One practical step today is simple and honest. Speak to God without a script, without promises, without appearances. 5 minutes of truth are worth more than hours of rehearsed words. When guilt paralyzes faith, truth opens a path, and something begins to move in the direction of restoration, the prayer that is born from ruin. In the story of King Manasseh, the prayer does not rise in the temple. It is born in ruin, in captivity, when everything that once sustained him has collapsed. You pray broken, afraid of not being heard, believing you went too far, and wondering if God can still forgive. It is a prayer from the bottom of the pit, spoken without strength, without polished words, only with truth. There, spiritual guilt and shame have nowhere left to hide. And here is the turning point that changes everything. God did not answer a beautiful prayer. He answered an honest one. When you stop justifying the mistake and simply confess, something begins to move. This is how spiritual restoration after failure begins, not through merit, but through surrender. Perhaps at some point, you realize that this story started to feel too uncomfortable. And that is not by chance, because Manasseh is not just an ancient name. He becomes a mirror. There is the Manasseh who failed, the one who knows exactly where the line was crossed. There is the Manasseh who drifted away, who did not break off all at once, but slowly distanced himself until he no longer recognized his own faith. And there is the Manasseh who believes he does not deserve to return, convinced he crossed an invisible line with no way back. The question that remains is not theological. It is personal. Which version of Manasseh is alive in you today? The one who still tries to control everything to avoid pain? The one who stepped away because guilt became too heavy? Or the one who has even thought about returning, but froze at the thought that God might reject you? At this point, the story of King Manasseh stops being ancient text and becomes self-examination. It stops being a distant narrative and becomes a mirror of the soul. And now comes the part that changes everything. God did not just hear Manasseh. God restored him. Not because he deserved it, not because he got things right after failing, not because he paid for what he did, but because God is a specialist in unlikely new beginnings. This means your story is still in motion. Failure was not the final point. The fall did not cancel the purpose. When you least expect it, God acts. And he acts exactly where you thought everything had ended. This moment does not ask for immediate reaction. It asks for silence, surrender, deep breathing. Because when God begins to restore, first he reaches the heart, and only then does he change the scenery. Before continuing life as it is worth stopping for a moment and facing these questions honestly. Where is guilt ruling your decisions today? It is not only about what you did. It is about how it began to direct your steps, your choices, your silences. When guilt gives the orders, faith obeys quietly. And that exhausts the soul. What did you stop trying because you believe you no longer have the right? Perhaps a new beginning, a calling, a closer relationship with God. And let me ask you one more thing, gently but truthfully. In which area does God want to restore you before pain becomes identity? Because when pain becomes who you are, it stops being a wound and becomes a prison. Now I invite you to pray a sincere prayer inspired by the prayer of Manasseh. God, I come as I am, without excuses, without masks, without strength to pretend. I failed. I lost myself on paths that did not heal. I let guilt speak louder than faith. But today I stop running. If mercy still exists, I need it now. Not because I deserve it, but because you are a God who restores, who listens to the broken heart and turns ruin into new beginnings. Amen. If this story spoke to you, do not keep it to yourself. Comment here. Which part touched your heart most deeply? If this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications.